I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, and I'm here with Sharif Fotouh. He is Managing Director, EdgePoint at Compass Datacenters. And we were talking about the Edge. It's one of my favorite discussions ever. You got to watch it.
Hey, I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk. Focused on cloud and co-location, data center industry trends, and dynamic market.
I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, and I'm here with Sharif Fotouh. Sharif, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us
Thanks
here on Hawk Talk number 33. So really excited about that, and excited to get your feedback on the data center industry. Obviously, you have a very interesting focus around the edge and that type of, I would say, like vertical in the way companies are using that or will use that in the future. So excited to get your feedback.
No, well, thanks for having me. And I want to say before we get started, congratulations on your 5-year anniversary.
Thank you.
It's a heck of a milestone.
Thank you.
And it's been cool to see the story of Data Center Hawk develop over
you bet.
the years.
Well, I appreciate that. Let's talk about, you have a really interesting background as far as some of the things that you were doing before EdgePoint and before being acquired by Compass. And so talk about those maybe your career path and how that really shaped, we were talking about it a little earlier, but how that shaped the ability for you to go out and do what you're doing today. I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, great question. My career path is kind of, if you imagine one of those Calvin and Hobbes comics with the like squiggly line, definitely not the most efficient route. But I think that variability kind of lended some interesting color. So I've been in the industry for about 15 years now. I started working for a regional data center operator out of Austin, Texas. And I had a very interesting collection of roles there throughout the years. I was there 6 years. Part of it was operating, retail co-location facilities. But part of it was also deploying for various web properties that was under the same family of companies in data centers all over the globe. And so throughout those 5-6 years, I kind of never specialized in any one aspect, but rather had familiarity and experience with everything up the network and system stack, all the way down to power whips and space planning.
So you got a really wide variety of kind of a knowledge base of the industry.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jack of all trades,
Sure.
master of none.
Yeah.
Right. In 2013, I started with Google on the Google Fiber project. And back then it was, very, very kind of early stage, a pretty small team. They had just had Kansas as their city, and it was publicly kind of known. It was just a trial or a test.
Yeah, so they were putting their Google Fiber product in that city.
Yep.
Got it, yep.
And so I moved out to California, to the Bay Area, and over the next 5 years at Google, I built and led the facilities and network deployment program for Google Fiber nationally.
Wow. What was that like?
It was actually, it was quite exciting, but at times really challenging.
Sure.
Everything from mundane labeling standards to building templated footprints for various peering functions and that kind of thing, so you could kind of cookie cutter it across the country. But it was really exciting. The mission was exciting, innovating in a space that's traditionally pretty slow, telecom. And the public was really energized by the product, and so that kind of fed into the excitement. So that program at Google Fiber encompassed kind of a wide spectrum of facilities, right? So everything from megawatt deployments within Google's hyperscale facilities for kind of our back-end services, regional POPs all over the country to effectively build your kind of national backbone network, for acquiring other networks and peering. And then most pertinent to what I'm doing today, hundreds of these small prefabricated telecom shelters that were dubbed by the press fiber huts. And that name stuck.
Sure, yeah.
And so what was really interesting about that fiber hut story is when I started, we had a very rough design that was effectively 10 to 15 kilowatt footprint, barely N+1 with a lot of single points of failure. It was a stretched cell tower shelter, right? They called the guys that are making shelters for cell tower sites, and they said, "Oh yeah, we can build you a slightly bigger one and upgrade some components." And then over the years, right, outages, failures, requirements for increased density, variability in footprint. We went from just kind of the typical PON gear, which is passive optical networking.
Okay.
Right? Went from just PON gear to including transport systems, to including servers, and getting more advanced. We went through multiple iterations of that design on my team. And so kind of what started as 10 or 15 kilowatts, the last design we produced over there was over 50 kilowatts and solidly N+1, if not 2N in some places.
Interesting. You bring up the point about the iteration of the product, and it's one of the things we were talking before just about when I started in the space back in like 2007, and just watching how the physical larger data center facility has been iterated over the last I don't know, 5-10 years. I just got back from Northern Virginia, and one of the things we were talking about is just the difference in design, and how different obviously it is today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And it really, I think when that iteration begins and it's really the product positioning itself for scalability down the road. And so you basically finished your time at Google, and then tell us about starting EdgePoint and that process, and what was your mindset behind really wanting to get out there and go do that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so let's see, late 2016, the Google Fiber project effectively went on pause, right? There was a change in strategy, and the organization kind of halted the expansion plans. And I had this kind of moment of wondering, okay, like, we went from racing down the highway to,
stopping.
Like, what do I do next, right? And what was really interesting, and this is kind of pre a lot of the discussions and conversations that are centered around the edge space now. There was barely a couple articles and players in that space at the time. And it's really the initial premise was, as somebody that was sourcing co-location all over the country in tier 2 markets, because Google Fiber was specifically targeting tier 2 markets, right? I was surprised and shocked by how many markets were underserved from a co-location perspective.
Interesting.
And
on the secondary
secondary
markets.
And look, since that time, a lot of those markets have been solved by players in that space, your edge connexes and tier points. But what really surprised me was a study we were doing for a specific city. I think it was Minneapolis at the time. And we were going to have to pay an exorbitant amount to a colo provider there to add a second generator. They had one generator for the whole facility. We were going to buy them a second generator for the whole facility. So I could take my 150 kW footprint inside, right? We didn't have like a huge footprint requirement, but we needed it to be
the redundancy,
right? And I remember walking out of that conference call, and my VP was with me, and I turned to him and I said, it'd just be cheaper to put a couple of our huts, and like it would be more robust. And that was months before we went on pause. But that thought kept gestating in my mind. And so when Google Fiber went on pause, I kind of locked into that and thought, well, hey, I'm uniquely positioned with this experience in producing hundreds of these shelters, deploying them all over the country, right? All the specific jurisdictional concerns and, going to seismic regions or regions with snow load, very humid and hot regions. And so, I thought that ecosystem I've really tapped into and understood. And there is an option there to support areas where the capacity, the co-location capacity or facility capacity is in an ideal location. And that's kind of what turned into Edge.
Sure. Interesting. So for those that are watching that don't have a good grasp on what Edge is, and and you're in it every day, and granular with the thought process and the definitions and things like that, but do your best to describe, and I think you've kind of done that through your conversation with what you did at Google, but do your best to describe, what the Edge is and why you believe that there's such a big opportunity, in the future with this type of data center product.
Got it. What the Edge is.
Just a question we should all
it's like
laugh about.
What, like religion, politics, and the Edge. Let's not talk about those three things. No, I mean, I like to keep things pretty simple.
Let's go.
So on the simplest level, distributing infrastructure is not a new trend, right? When I started my career, advanced organizations would take a footprint domestically, so to say, in Ashburn, Virginia, and maybe West Coast like Los Angeles, and maybe Chicago, right? And that was effectively the coverage you needed for those applications. Over time, we've seen, a boom of secondary markets or other NFL cities that perhaps aren't, specifically acquiring subsea cables, but you look at your Atlantas and everything else, they've just boomed, right? That was the march towards the edge, right? And that same trend is continuing, right? And so what was secondary markets, we're now looking at tier 3 markets.
Yes.
We're looking at, big metropolises like Dallas, for example. If all your data centers are located in the center of Dallas or in the outskirts, it doesn't do good for the majority of your actual eyeballs in residential or in customers, right?
Yes.
And so that's effectively, it's just an extension of that same trend, right? As bandwidth demands go up, as application performance becomes more critical, you're going to want to locate the capacity closer and closer to the user.
Yep. So let's talk, that's a great point. Let's talk about strategy and how you've seen companies do that well or not do that well. One of the biggest growth points in the data center market over the last 3 to 5 years has been the hyperscale market. It's really taken the industry to new levels from a demand perspective, et cetera. But there's also the enterprise user base. These are companies that traditionally have housed their infrastructure inside facilities of their own. They have come out, most of them, half of them, into co-location facilities and now have some sort of hybrid approach with their IT infrastructure. So, this edge idea and what you just described, there is an infrastructure strategy in play where some people are probably doing this well and some people are not. So maybe talk about that. How have you seen companies do that well and approach their strategy well? Maybe the enterprise user sector. How have you seen them do that well?
Specifically in the enterprise sector, I think it's important to there's the Buddhist concept of the new mind, right? Come into the problem with a clean slate. And that's really hard for larger enterprises because, you have, years of backlog and technical debt. And, facilities of different ages and infrastructure that's in different stages of its life cycle. And so it really is hard to tackle that problem really as blank slate. But that really is, to me and from my perspective, the key to success for those enterprises because there's a lot of different tool sets that are now available. And if you're thinking within the paradigms of 5, 10, 15 years ago, you're probably not going to build an optimal infrastructure, right, or a topology. And so, specifically, you see a lot of enterprises shift and kind of cloudify their footprint. And then very quickly they realize there's kind of a long tail of applications and services that don't make sense in the cloud. They're high bandwidth consuming, really expensive to locate far away. And so, you see them kind of contract and reduce their enterprise data center footprint as they cloudify. And then you walk through this building and there's 10 or 20 racks, right? And they still have to keep all of the infrastructure running for them, right? And so that's really the challenge that I think we have a new tool to offer. It's like, hey, reclaim that real estate. Use it for whatever your primary revenue driving activities are. If you're a hospital, use it for patient beds. If you're a manufacturing facility, use it for assembly lines. And we can put a facility in your parking lot that takes 6 or 8 parking spots. That's fully 2N and redundant and hardened, and free up all of that space and all the operational costs of that large infrastructure.
Yeah. So describe let's do a little deeper dive on the product. What when the Compass Edge product, what is it, and where can you deploy it? I mean, talk about the actual details around the product itself.
Okay, I'll try not to get down the rabbit hole.
Come on,
with this
you're
one,
good.
But this is one of my favorite topics.
Let's go.
Really proud of what we've built at Compass. And the key premise is the edge isn't about 1 or 2 facilities. And, something I've, told our board multiple times, anybody can deploy 1 or 2 little shelters, right? Or little data centers. It's not an astronomical feat, right? The complexity becomes in mass and scale.
Yes, totally.
Right? And so I have this kind of oh crap moment when I was at Google when we ordered a new wave of 50 shelters. We went through the normal pricing discussions and design discussions, and finally we were ready. Everything was signed off. We issued the PO, and an hour later, I got an email, hey, we're really excited about your business, and attached is a spreadsheet. Please put the delivery addresses for all 50 of these shelters and the dates you need them by. And that was my oh crap moment because I realized, well, now I have 50 little construction projects to manage, 50 little facility integration and commissioning projects to manage, 50 system deployment projects to manage, cabling and racking and
hire
stacking.
50 more people. We need,
and they were all over the country, right? So I mean, so that's the oh crap moment. everybody will hit that point, right?
Uh-huh.
Anybody that's in this edge space, right now we're kind of in a trial and nascent stage, but as the volumes increase and as the market demands grow, people are going to hit that point. And one of the breaking points there is those construction projects are rarely going to happen on the same timing. Construction is ugly and like always unpredictable, right? That's just the nature of the beast. And so you can try to fight that, right? But good luck.
Yeah.
Instead, what we try to do is design around that. So what that means is we need to be able to ship one of our facilities, one of the EdgePoint data centers, to whichever location is ready first. And here's where the problem becomes, because what if one of your locations is in seismic zone 4 and one of them's in a wind-rated area, right, where you need, Miami-Dade County or something, right? So all of a sudden you're playing this game with the factory where they're going, okay, this shelter's ready, and you go, oh no,
we need
that the site that needed the seismic shelter isn't ready. We need the wind-rated one, or we need the one with the snow load rating. And you literally are playing kind of musical chairs with the factory, trying to consolidate your multifaceted construction schedule with their production schedule. And again, lived through it, and messy, right? And so with our EdgePoint shelter, the key premise is that it's a single consistent footprint that can go into any region. So it's wind rated, it's seismically rated, it's designed for high snow load areas, hot and humid climates. Wherever you need to place it in the country, it can go without any changes. And so it allows a user to buy 200 of them and start 200 construction projects and just in time delivery as they come off the line, send them to whatever site is next.
Yeah, and physically you can put them inside, outside. Talk about that a little bit. I mean,
technically you put them wherever you want. With that said, we've primarily designed it to be an outdoor shelter, specifically because we think from a real estate perspective, it's designed for that highest bar, designed to be withstanding the elements, designed it to be a hardened shelter. And then, if somebody wants to put it into an existing shell, there's no reason it won't work. But on the other hand, again, that consistency in product is key.
Yeah, your comments about the production of these units is really interesting because we've seen the focus on supply chain at the big scale in the space over the last 3 to 5 years. I mean, all you'll hear larger data center operators talk about hyperscale builds, or they're talking about supply chain. How quickly can we deliver this? How efficiently can we deliver this? How inexpensive for the user can we deliver it? And it's interesting to see the supply chain conversation on the smaller scale as far as the 200 100 kW, 200 kW range, because I think what it shows is that speed of delivery and your ability to scale up quickly is super important in both sizes of requirements, and just speaks to the fact I think that the users today, the data center user expects or has matured to the point where they expect that solution to be delivered as quickly as possible. And it's interesting to see you all work through the process of going, hey, now we know we can deliver X amount of these in this amount of time in these regions, and they're all the same. So
no, absolutely, and it's about consistency in delivery, right? It's not just, speed is obviously important, but at the end of the day, there's somebody managing their application performance. They're about to release a new feature, and they're looking at their capacity curve and graph, and they're going, I need to turn on this new capacity, this compute, the storage, this bandwidth by Q3, or we're sunk, right? Or we're not going to release this new feature. We're going to lose against our competitors that are. And so really that's the nature of the beast, and just understanding that you're a tail on a very large dog for these organizations and working around those constraints are critical.
Yeah. Have you seen any different, when you think of like industry verticals, retail, healthcare, technology, financial, those type of firms, have you seen any of those companies gravitate more towards this type of data center and this approach, or does each one of those have a different mindset around them? Have you seen the different industry types embrace what you all are doing?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I think there's kind of two different segments of verticals, right? Or categories of verticals. So one of them is kind of on-premise solutions, right? So I'm a university, I'm a hospital, I'm a manufacturing facility. I'm deploying more connected devices. There's more data being generated. That data doesn't all need to be backhauled, right? Your video cameras, your surveillance cameras around your facility. That doesn't need to be cloudified, right? I just need to store 30 days of retention and then throw it away. And so the on-premise solutions is in one category. I think the other, and honestly, as I look at the edge space in general, I think it's often ignored. A lot of people are instead gravitating towards the second category, which is that kind of wide mesh, I'm going to deploy 5, 10, 50 of these around a city. And, there's usually graphics of like autonomous cars or somebody with a VR headset involved, right? And, definitely at the base of cell tower. It has to be at the base of a cell tower.
Yeah.
And that's in its own category. And that opens up a whole slew of verticals, whether they're hyperscale companies, MNOs, fixed network operators. Anybody could technically play at that kind of edge mesh network space. But to be honest, like while everybody's attention is there, I think there's a lot of applications that we're assuming will require X, milliseconds of latency or microseconds of latency. Those applications haven't even been developed, much less adopted, much less those requirements fleshed out, right? And so I'm not saying that trend isn't going to exist where performance needs to improve, but from my perspective, it's we're kind of assuming a lot as facility people and infrastructure people as far as what the future will hold.
Yeah, you mentioned 5G, and talk about the impact that the growth of 5G and the maturity of 5G will have on the edge market, and what opportunities does that create for your team at Compass?
Ooh, great question again. No, so I mean, everybody's excited about 5G, right? It's one more G better than what we have.
Get that right.
No, I mean, it's obviously exciting, especially as mobile traffic keeps growing, right? And so, we're now hitting the constraints of what our mobile devices can support. And we're seeing breaking points in stuff like jitter and latency on the performance on 4G networks. So 5G is super exciting. With that said, 5G in and of itself doesn't demand edge computing, right? So 5G is a vehicle, right? And so if I say, hey, I'm going to give you a car that's twice as fast as your current car, does that mean you'll get everywhere in half the time? Well, no, right? You're still going to obey the speed limit. You're going to be at stoplights. Right? Now, if I say, hey, if I give you a car that's twice as fast, but there's a family emergency across town, well, then you'll probably be. So that's the need there, right? That family emergency is the need or the application. And so, sure, 5G will open the door to a bunch of needs and applications, but which one that will be, still to be seen.
So it's a great tie-in to what do you feel like the needs are that are coming that will help drive that? So 5G, let's say 5G is in place, it's efficient. What are the needs that you all look at and go, hey, once these hit the way we anticipate, it really changes things for the market.
So first off, we really like to take an application-centric perspective. Right. So let's focus on the top of the stack and then trickle those assumptions all the way down. Right. Rather than starting at the bottom. So when you think about the applications and you look at the trend, I mean, and we're going to skip past, or I'll skip past all the surprising statistics over, in the year 2022, data usage is going to be a gazillion petabytes, and sure, but we can all agree we're not going to be using less data. And it's probably a safe assumption we're going to be using more. What's really interesting about our data usage patterns, however, isn't just the quantity. What's specifically interesting about it is that the type of data that we're using is changing, it's evolving. So if you think of the internet 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, those data patterns were largely a broadcast network. The majority of data was video data that was getting sent from central sources and down to our TVs and devices, right? And before that, it was music, and before that, it was email or articles, or a broadcast network, duplicating newspaper, radio, TV, right? Well, now we're seeing interesting data patterns that aren't going top down; they're going sideways. They're going up. If you think my house with my little surveillance cameras, my Nest cameras or whatever, is generating as much data as a TV station. I'm effectively a broadcast station at this point. I've got 5 channels. And so what an interesting traffic pattern. And now the question is, well, does that traffic necessarily need to go over to Ashburn, Virginia, or Phoenix? No, chances are I'm down the road in my office and I'm just checking that UPS delivered my latest package. Right? Why is that data getting backhauled across the country? Right? When you order an Uber, why is that data getting sent out of state? You can't even order an Uber from out of state. You're definitely ordering one nearby, right? So those are local traffic patterns that we're seeing with the data, and the data going in different directions. And that, to me, is what's really going to drive a shift in the facilities and network architectures that support those patterns.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, one of the interesting things I read about, this is probably 3 or 4 years ago, but I was talking specifically about how YouTube and how when that platform arose, how it really, changed. It gave everyone the opportunity to, now you've got so many people producing data, and it's a similar, you mentioned the Nest cameras, but it's like a similar approach. Now you have these technology pieces that are producing the data, and if we put them into use from either a business perspective or a consumer perspective, the amount of that data is just exponential. And that's today, let alone,
whatever, 2020, right?
3 years from now, 5 years.
And it's not just that old broadcast model was largely supplemented by local caching.
Yep.
Which was great. And, Netflix has very efficient caching programs, and their Open Connect program is great at intercepting a lot of those requests and serving video very locally, right?
Yep.
That's how their business model has managed to survive. But again, when you're talking about broadcasting your videos, to your grandma across the country or your extended family, all of a sudden that local caching is completely useless, right? And so the way we've designed our systems infrastructure and topology needs to evolve.
Yeah. How has the hyperscale growth and what's happened over the last several years, how has that impacted the edge space? I mean, has that had a positive effect on the opportunities, a negative effect, neutral, maybe too early to tell? What's your thought on that?
Oh, it's a complex ecosystem.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I'd go so far as to say this is directly causing that, and but there's a lot of correlations you can tie. So on one side, and I'm going to get a little more specific, not just hyperscale, but specifically the drive towards cloud, has pushed consolidation. It's pulled out capacity from local areas and has opened an opportunity for a solution that will effectively let your capacity get closer to users, right? It has driven a little bit of a need. On the other hand, because those hyperscale cloud players have such an immense network and also their scale, it also gives them the opportunity to potentially get into the edge game themselves and just offer their platform closer.
Sure.
And you can see some of the early kind of band-aids of the edge need. AWS has their Greengrass project, if you're familiar.
Okay, no, I'm not familiar with that.
So this is like, and I hate to call it a band-aid, but that's effectively what it is. It's, an IoT device, an IoT aggregation device that they'll ship to your location is effectively off-net, right? You're a manufacturing facility out in West Texas. You have all these IoT and automated devices, and you want to run everything within the AWS environment. They'll ship you a little box, right? And today, it's pretty rudimentary and corner case, but it points to the requirement and the need. And so as that need grows, as those factories get more automated, as more data grows, well, that little box is going to grow, and before you know it, you're going to have a few racks of it.
Interesting. For the people that aren't as familiar with the edge discussion, there's a lot of, people are familiar with cloud computing. We've talked about edge, but there's also terms on fog computing. So help demystify the edge versus the fog from your perspective.
Yeah, the key to the edge markets.
And sometimes I feel like the data, not just the data centers, but the technology industry just thrives on confusing people. It's like, hey, how can we, anyway.
So. Oh, no. That's, I feel like as the technology industry has grown, marketing has become just as key as the actual technology. Yes. And so, Internet of Things turned into, Internet of Everything turned into, it's just.
Is there a difference? Yes.
Yeah, no. But so fog computing is effectively an implementation of the edge that's effectively a shared resource pool with multiple distributed facilities. So it's the simple way to say it is all fog computing is effectively edge, but all edge computing isn't necessarily fog computing. Okay. I could put a single edge footprint that's not connected to a bunch of them, that those workloads are solely homed at one location. That's not fog computing. But there are applications where you could see benefit to shifting workloads to nearby facilities if you have a mesh network of facilities. And what's primarily kind of enabled that is in the network space, like networking high bandwidth, like high capacity has gotten enormously cheap, right? Like the network devices themselves and the capacities they can handle. I mean, I remember when like 10 gig optics were out and it was like insane. And, now you're talking 100 or 400 gig, and people are pushing terabits. And so that with network function virtualization, or NFV, has effectively allowed the network to be the backplane now. It's the system backplane.
Interesting.
And so now you can connect storage units and GPUs and CPU units and build a virtual system, and they don't have to be physically located in the same spot. And now that opens up kind of the concept of fog computing, is I can kind of sprinkle my capacity around and poach from it as I need.
So when a user has a need and they, either they approach you all or other edge companies, I mean, let's say they're more enterprise user and they might have a need for one of these, but let's say they have a need for 10 or 20 to solve a problem. How quickly can those be deployed based off of supply chain and where they send them? I mean, what should a company be thinking about how quickly you could set up a complex system of these different deployments?
No, complex system. I'll absolutely echo that. Right. It's not just about manufacturing the facilities in time. You have to think about the program holistically.
Okay.
And that's really, I think, where our experience at Compass lends an advantage, because it's not simply about spitting out little data centers out of a factory. You have to work on your site, your whole real estate program and site development program. You have to ask all the questions that data center people generally leave out, which is, how are you going to accomplish system integration once a facility arrives? How are you going to commission these remote facilities? How do you ship $5 million of IT to a location where you don't have a facility?
That's
a
interesting.
non-addressable
That's
location.
great.
And look, there's experiences of guys on my team towing an 800-pound router up a dirt path up a hill to get one of and this is like $1 million piece of gear, right? With a little hand truck, a U-Haul hand truck, right? Like the rented dolly. So those are the areas that anybody that's going to be successful in the edge space really need to focus on, not just focusing on their simple facility design, but zooming back and looking at a holistic solution that solves for those customers of scale. Because calling them and going, or sending them that spreadsheet and going, let us know where you want them delivered. Well, now you're a commoditized product. You're not really an ecosystem provider.
And it is so strategic with what with the end game of serving the user better. There's, to your point, I mean, and those are really good questions. We should make sure that we log those in the show notes, just on how companies are thinking through their strategy with what they're actually deploying. I think what this shows, and your experience certainly proves, is just as the data center user is maturing, it's a really exciting time in our space, because it's giving your work and others' work in this space, and is giving people companies the option to build more efficient systems, and ones that serve their business better, that serve their end users better. And so I just think it's a really exciting time, and I'm fascinated to think about the next 3 to 5 years and what this space will become.
No, absolutely.
And maybe talk about that, just the future of EdgePoint and the Compass EdgePoint product, and why you're excited about the next 5 years in the space, and what you think the opportunities are.
I think so. First, as kind of a self-professed geek, right? The next 3 to 5 years are going to see just a really interesting array of applications that I'm very selfishly excited in, because I hate sitting in traffic and driving my own car. So I'm really excited about all the gadgets coming out, right? Like, life has just gotten better with technology, right? Like, I can monitor my house, I can unlock my door, like I can do so many operations that, used to be tedious and, very manual, right? So the applications are exciting, and that just excites me as a technologist. Second, it's really being able to leverage our experience and support those users in understanding kind of the journey that needs to be traveled as their application grows and needs distributed infrastructure. It's, again, the lessons I learned over the past 5-6 years being in a program like this. I can't wait to leverage those for our customers, because, again, not because we're necessarily the smartest people here, but the scars on my back, I'd love to turn those into lessons learned and get a positive outcome, right? Like lemons and lemonade. And so I'm really excited to be able to, work with our customers and new potential customers to really lean on that experience, build a program for them that is holistic, and show them the advantages that we can bring to the table.
Yeah. Well, Sharif, thank you for sharing your insight with us. And for those that are watching, this is a fascinating discussion because it is. It's very much today, but it's very much looking out at the future of where things are going. And so I just always appreciate people that are willing to share what they've learned through their career path, through where they are now. So certainly excited about what you all are doing, and will be fun to watch over the next several years.
Oh, thank you.
You bet.
It was a pleasure.
You bet.